I'm going straight in to introduce our first speaker, who's Dr. Amir Hannan. Now, if there's a problem in world medicine, it was Harold Shipman. The notorious name of a man who was not only the worst medical murderer in history, but also the worst civil murderer in the whole of the United Kingdom in all time. An absolute disaster for patients and indeed for the medical profession. We need to spare a thought for the colleagues who were in that practice at that time, of whom Dr. Hannan was one. So he worked alongside Dr. Shipman, and he had the extraordinary problem of trying to continue in a practice that had just about lost the ultimate reputation. His solution was radical reform, and he has produced a number of ideas, which we're about to hear, about what he can do for patients in a really patient-centered way, notably making the medical records widely available in very exciting ways. And to add to the double act, delighted to have Ms. Marilyn Gollom, who is here as well and who's going to speak to us, who is our second speaker today, who's coming from the PPG group in that high practice. And she has had a lot of experience overseas. She's now heart and soul, I think I can say, committed to that PPG, and she will be the second speaker after Dr. Hannan. Dr. Hannan.
Thank you very much for that introduction for us. But I'd just like to pass over to Marilyn, because actually I'm the double act. She's actually the lead.
Hello, I'm Marilyn Gollom, as you've heard, and as well as the challenge of doing this presentation, we've got this to deal with. I'd like to start our presentation by mentioning Margaret Rickson. Margaret Rickson was a very humble lady in our practice. She was 80-odd years old when she started this journey with us, and if you see the slide now, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Well, Margaret Rickson certainly did that. In her 80s, she went for online records access. Didn't know how to use a computer, went to the library for lessons, and became one of our chief advocates of it. She was an inspiration to many. Unfortunately, her poor health meant she couldn't get out and about as we are today here. But we'd like to dedicate this presentation to her memory. Unfortunately, she did die last year, and there will be a memorial to her locally, which we're all invited to, which we'll mention later. But it just shows what one person, one humble person, and she truly didn't think that she could change anything. She wasn't rich, she wasn't, well, she was popular, not highly educated. She was just a normal person, and yet she has touched so many lives, so many PPGs in fact. And she was, as it says at the end of this slide, happy, content, and that contentment came from the fact that she knew she was pioneering and really helping others in our community and nationally.
Okay, so as you know, I'm a GP at Holland Medical Centres. I'm also the long-term conditions lead at Thames and Glossop CCG, and I'm also the co-chair of the NHS Values Group for Greater Manchester. In fact, Marilyn's one of the members of that group, and we're going to come back to values in a moment. But there are some very, very significant pressures that we're all feeling, whether it's as patients, as members of the public, clinicians or managers. There seems to be, there always has been from the word go, people saying, how do I get an appointment with a doctor? That's just what I want. There's an issue about access and how we can get access. Aging population is always seen as a negative comment, but actually I think that's a success, isn't it, that we're all living longer? So let's celebrate that success, not see that as a pressure, but no doubt it does mean that there are challenges because the system now needs to gear up towards looking after people who are older themselves, but I see that as a success, not as a negative point. And the other thing is that we tend to talk about things as just one particular condition, but increasingly we're finding that people have multiple conditions, multiple health issues, depression, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, back pain and so on. And it's the interaction between those things that causes us all great difficulties, whether you're clinicians, managers or patients. And increasingly people are becoming more frail, and we're recognising that. that you kind of know what to do when you're managing one little bit, but when you're trying to manage many things, it becomes very, very hard to do. One of the other things is that oftentimes people don't really know what to do themselves, and because they don't know, they try and do something, and then they get told off, saying, why have you gone to A&E? Why have you gone to the GP? Why have you done X, Y, and Z? And actually, most people say, well, we just don't know what to do. What can we do? Tell us what to do so we can improve what we're doing. And then this idea of why is healthcare and social care being separated? And we're starting to realise now that although healthcare is free, social care is means tested. If you don't get the social care that you need, you don't get the care that you need. So we're starting to realise that we need to bring those worlds together. But it's complicated because they're different cultures, they're different ways of working. Are you a patient, or are you a service user, or are you a citizen? Those are some of the questions that are being raised. And then there's the problems around the data quality, which we're also coming across. And if we don't get the data right about you, it's very, very hard to then deliver services that meet your needs or actually improve outcomes. And then the other thing is everyone's rushing about. Everybody, no one seems to have time. And I'm not just talking about clinicians, but also as patients. You know, my in-laws turned around and said that actually, once they retired, they became even more busier than they were whilst they were working. They'd rather get back into working life. So we're all becoming time poor. And then there's this thing about, in the old days, it was easy, wasn't it? You went to your GP and your GP sorted it out. Now there seems to be multiple different people that you have to go to, multiple different organisations, none of them seem to talk to each other, and it just becomes a problem. And then that, of course, leads to a lack of confidence, and a lack of confidence in the system then leads to a lack of trust, and a lack of trust in the system leads to all the problems that we're facing at the moment. Now then, if we focus on problems, then guess what? We're going to have just more and more problems. But if we start to focus on possibilities, then we're going to have a lot more opportunities. And that's what I want to start thinking about, is what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities that we can all do together, collectively. Now, it's a really significant couple of weeks this week, because 2 weeks ago we had our 10 years of our patient participation group. This is a photograph taken of our first patient participation group at the practice on the 12th of May. 2005, and you can see a number of different people. All of them were patients in the practice, including a young person. There's a child there, some elderly people. That, by the way, is Margaret Rickson. She was the lady who was there at our very first meeting. It's also very significant for another reason, and that's because there are a couple of people at the back. They were the doctors in the practice. It was always recognised that a PPG is not just for patients to be together. And in case you're wondering, I took the photograph, so I'm kind of focusing. That's why I'm not in the photo. But it was always nice to see that from the word go, there were patients there and there were clinicians there who were working together. And this lady, and I've forgotten who her name is, but this was the lady who'd come from the PCT to tell us what a PPG was. It's hard for you to see this at the back, but this slide that we took was what a successful PPG looks like. And it's one that has recognised ground rules. It has an elected committee with a chairperson and secretary. It meets at regular intervals. It shares the work, it communicates well, and it has a clear and agreed objectives for it. Now that was on the first slide on the first day 10 years ago, and it's lovely to be able to share that with our PPG now and say, what have we achieved in that 10-year period? Now then, back then, when we all sat together, there were certain priorities. The first one was we had to get a chair and a secretary. So each person who came along and said what they thought and who they were and why they'd come along and what their hopes and aspirations were. We had a building next door that was an empty shell. And the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues that the patients were all complaining about was why wasn't there a pharmacy next door? So that became the primary objective of the PPG, to try and get a pharmacy next door so it would be easy for patients who come in with a water infection, chest infection, back pain, or whatever it was, to be able to just go next door instead of having to walk into town. So they made that their priority. From the word go, they were all saying, how do we get an appointment with a doctor? And of course Margaret Rickson was there, who'd had access to her records for a couple of years, and she wanted to bring along the idea that as a PPG, wouldn't it be wonderful if patients could. So from the word go, these were the priorities that we had. Now, the challenges that we've got now as a GP inside the practice are immense, and we are facing them and we're dealing with them. But this is a lovely slide that really paints what the challenges are. This was actually done by the Barclays Bank, and they were looking at the needs of employees and where we need to move forward. And what they talked about is that there are 5 generations of people out there. There's the maturists who were born before 1945. And if I share some of the things, now this was from an employment perspective, so they made up 3% of the population. but their aspiration was to own a home. Their attitude was largely to be disengaged with everybody else. They've always had a job for life. Their signature product was having ownership of a car. Their communication method was the letter. They loved being able to meet with people face to face, and their preference when making a formal decision was within a face-to-face setting. You've then got the baby boomers, 1945 to 1960. They wanted job security. They had televisions. They liked using the telephone to be able to communicate with people. They liked face-to-face ideally, but telephone or email if required. But if it was something really important, they wanted to actually meet with the person. You've then got Generation X, 1961 to 1980. They wanted work-life balance. They'd grown up on computers. They used email and texting. And they liked the idea of going online, but would prefer face-to-face if possible. You've then got Generation Y, 1981 to 1995. They wanted freedom and flexibility. They've grown up on tablets and smartphones. They use text and social media, and I'll come back to social media in a moment. They like using online and mobile services, but when it's something important, they do like the face-to-face. And then you've got finally Generation Z, which is 1995 onwards. This was in 2013, so it's a couple of years old, this. But for them, it was security and stability that mattered. For them, what was important was using handheld devices rather than a formal letter, for instance. They liked the idea of FaceTime and Skype. And actually for them, they like the idea of connecting with the rest of the world and finding out what other people think, as opposed to the face-to-face. And the challenge that I've got as a GP at this moment in time is I'm trying to deliver a service where there are some people who love the face-to-face and they want a formal letter, and you've got this other group who want to go online, are increasingly using Facebook and other mechanisms to find out what's going on. How the hell do we square that hole? It's very difficult, isn't it? And of course, the really important thing is this issue about trust. It's incredibly difficult to build trust, and we don't talk about it enough. But if we don't have trust, then something very, very scary happens. So I'm going to talk about, well, what does trust mean? There's this thing called the trust quotient. No one really knows where it's come from, but there's an idea behind it. And it says that you build trust by these four factors, one of which is about credibility. How believable is whatever that person's saying that I can latch onto? If it's believable, I'm more likely to follow it. The second is about reliability. Is this something that I can depend on? Because if I can't, I'm less likely to trust it. And can I rely on that when I need it? And the third one is intimacy. In other words, do I really trust this person with my thoughts and ideas? Because if I do, I build up trust. But there's another sting in the tail. Because if I ever get the feeling that this person is only promoting themselves and not anybody else, then I rapidly lose trust. And we've seen this time and time again, including myself. I often think about myself and think, is this about me? Because if it is, forget it, it ain't going to happen. So I'm not interested about me. But if it is about you, and if it touches what you're seeing and feeling and doing, then it's going to matter. So this is really important about what are we here for, what are we trying to do? Is it credible? Is it reliable? Can I trust the information that I'm sharing? Because if I can, I build up trust. And we've got to start thinking about this organisationally and beyond. So let's now whisk over to where the magic happens, the real job, the day job, where I'm inside my consulting room. There are three experts in that room. The first, I guess, I could start with is the clinician. You're coming to come and see the doctor, the nurse, the pharmacist, or whoever it might be, wherever it is. You're going there because that individual has been trained, has been recognised by his peers to meet a certain standard. Hopefully that individual knows how to listen, how to take a history, how to examine, how to come up with a differential diagnosis, how to come up with a plan of action. That individual may well also have good knowledge about the local services that you can tap into. Those are the things that that clinician has. But there's another expert in the room, and that, of course, is the patient that we don't recognise. We don't recognise what skills and what knowledge you bring. That person may well have come to me because they've got back pain. They may well have come to me because their family are thinking about going on a walking holiday and they're wondering whether it's okay for them to book that holiday and whether their back pain will hold or not. that person may well have the knowledge about how it's affecting, how their back pain is affecting their partner, their family, or whatever it is. Nothing else in the world is ever going to tell me that. That's the expertise that patient has, that individual has, what experiences they've had, where they've been to, who said what to them, and everything else. So that's the expertise that the patient has. However, there's a third expert in the room, and that's that computer system. I might not know that person from Adam or Eve, but when I put their name into that computer system, up comes their medical record, telling me about all the problems that they've got, what consultations they've had with me, with my partners, with other staff in the practice, what blood tests, what investigations we've had, letters that have come back from the hospital and everything else. And if I'm thinking about what to do about that back pain, I might use something like the Map of Medicine or clinical knowledge summaries, for instance, which are websites that I can go to that can advise me about the latest evidence on how to manage that back pain. And it might be that I might use, today it's called Choose and Book It, in a week's time it's going to be called e-referrals, where if I am going to choose to refer that patient onto another hospital, the computer can show me which services are out there, what time slots there might be, and everything else. Now typically, that computer screen is turned towards me. But actually, if we turn the screen around so that the patient can see the same information as I can see, then something very exciting happens. Because, as a clinician, I'm trusting you as a patient to tell me what's going on, but you're trusting me to provide the best that medicine can offer. And if we can both see the same information together, then we move into something really exciting, which is what I call a partnership of trust.
Right, from the patient's point of view, to inspire trust from my perspective, from the patient perspective, as you can see here, I can see exactly what's on that screen, but more importantly, if you have records access, when I get home, I can also see what happened in that consultation. You can't always remember what the doctor said. Often if you're, there's an element of fear if you're not well, it may be complex, and you're nodding and saying, yes doctor, and you get home and you think, what on earth have they said? Records access means you can go online and you can see exactly what the doctor said. Yeah, that's what he said, that's what I must do. But also, it's not just about records access. I see records access as part of the broader picture for patients to go forward with safe medicine, also go forward in a modern way to save the national health time, to save the national health money, and for us to take back some ownership of looking after ourselves. I'm going to highlight what I'm saying by an example from my own family, and I do have their permission. My grandson has severe haemophilia A, and it's a very debilitating condition. My daughter had to give up a very well-paid job to look after him because he needs injecting. And even though he's now at nursery, she has to be on hand in case he falls, trips, or just has a spontaneous bleed. So she applied for disability living allowance. Now, anyone who has applied for that knows it's long and drawn out. You have, they want evidence. My daughter went online, the 37 consultants' letters, she just went click. They were all printed, put in an envelope, off they went. She's also monitoring his condition. She's part of a closed group called Hemo Mums, so their mothers of haemophiliacs share experiences. So if they have a bleed, if there's something going on, they can check on that website and get advice. Very powerful indeed. The other thing, she's now injecting at home. They've been taught to inject at home, and the nurse who's came out to see that everything was going well said the severity of his condition, we at our case conferences, we expect him to present every week in A&E. They've never seen him in A&E since he went on prophylaxis, not once. Dr. Hannan is his GP. He's never seen him because he's so well monitored and cared for at home. A few weeks ago, he had a nasty fall, and he wanted grandmother. So I went round and I watched as I walked in, and Harry is preparing his infusion, and he's drawing it up into the syringe, and he says, "Come on, Grandma, bring the tourniquet," and we go through, and if we put the picture up of Harry now, he was 3. And he is already starting to care for himself. Now, how much is that saving the national health? But how much is it empowering him and empowering his family, particularly his mother, to actually monitor his progress? I think it's just phenomenal. Without records access, this would not be possible at all. You can also check for errors on your online records access, which does happen. With the best will in the world, it can happen, and you can bring notice to it. You can plan people's care. Harry's care is on a graph, so we can see when he's spiking, when he's having more bleeds. Filling in forms we've already been through. Sharing information. Every time he has an infusion, it goes online and it's monitored at the hospital, and if they see anything unusual for him, they will phone. But that's saving time. Again, I'm just sounding like an advert, saving money. You become an active partner in your own care. I'm passionate about self-care, to start taking ownership and looking after ourselves as much as we can, to look after ourselves, to release our GPs a little bit, to take a bit of the pressure off. And I'll hand back over to Dr. Hannan.
Thank you very much. Because actually Darwin told us this, that it's not the strongest of species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And I've seen this time and time again, that you don't have to be a doctor or a professor or come down to wherever it is. There are people right inside, and the very fact that they're right inside my practice is telling me they're everywhere. Actually, do you know what? I can see all these people in the room here. Every single one of you clearly is a change agent, is someone who's wanting to come along, learn, take things back to your own community and start sharing information. But what is that information? What is it that you can take back, that you can start to share with your own colleagues and friends? And that's what I want to share with you very briefly now. So we started back in 2005 with the PPG and also giving patients access to their records. This is our latest data up until yesterday, and what you can see there is that 36% of our patient population has access to their records. This starts at 0, and this is 90 plus. Our oldest patient is 101 years old and has access to a record. The reds are females, the blues are males. So you can see in every single age group we've got patients accessing their records. But in the main, they are people between 25 and 65 or 70. They're the group of people who've started with some kind of long-term condition where they're coming in and they're getting blood tests done or investigations or being referred on. This is another way of looking at that same data. So if you take asthma, for instance, overall 36%, 43% of our asthma patients have got access to their records. They could be anywhere in the world. If they have to go to an out-of-hours or an A&E, they put their passwords in, they can share the information with that doctor, that nurse, that pharmacist, that neighbour, whoever it is. They're the ones who are able to share the information. That's a really important point, coming back to trust. COPD, 34%. Diabetes, 43%. Cancer, scary diagnosis. Look at that. 40% of our cancer patients are able to now share their information. Look at this, depression and anxiety. You'd think they'd be the ones who'd be really scared. 63% of that patient group have got access, and you can see the numbers are large, 928 patients. I can't wait until we hit 1,000 patients. Imagine 1,000 patients with anxiety and depression who can access their records and see what's going on and read for themselves and understand it. We hit a very significant milestone, I think, rheumatoid arthritis. 51%, more than half the patients in our practice with rheumatoid arthritis have got access. And if we just go down to learning disabilities, 20%, Bengali patients, 36%. Okay, how have we gone about doing this? We've got a practice website that we encourage people to look at. And down at the bottom it says register now. When you click on register now, you can see our online consent process. It's a two-step process. You get your PIN numbers from the front desk and you complete a questionnaire. Now you might wonder why we're doing a questionnaire. Well, because there are risks associated with this. There are potential problems with it. We want patients to think about what those problems might be so that we can identify them, and there's an opportunity to have a discussion before you get access. It's rather like, for instance, when you're getting into a car, you don't just get in, you take a driving test to ensure that you're safe before you get behind the wheel. So, how do we get these empowered patients? Well, we take a patient who might be coming into the practice for whatever reason it might be. We engage with them. We find out what sorts of ideas they've got, what sorts of things. They might put a mobile phone down on the desk and it's a smartphone. We go, oh, are you on the internet? Did you know? We can enable you to access your records, so start informing patients about what they do. We try to activate them, but of course patients might not immediately walk out, oh yes, I want access to my records. It takes a while. They'll have a few experiences. They maybe go to A&E and think, oh, that doctor keeps saying you can share the information. Can't you just put some password? No, we can't. So they come back and they go, I spent 6 hours in there and didn't know anything about the doc. Ah, that's because you, and some point, you become very angry. And at that point, you build momentum. Do you know what, doc? I am going to do this now. And at that point, it happens, and they become this flying empowered patient. There's just one problem with that, and that is each and every one of us is going to die one day. At some point, we're going to see information that's going to scare us. That's why it's not enough to say you've got access to your records. You need to have understanding, and we now need to start thinking about safety netting, because the one patient amongst us who is actually getting scared, when they put their hand up, they don't want to be told, come back in 3 weeks' time. We need to try and understand how we can support them. And that's how we build a flying empowered patient. But how do we go from one patient to the 60 million that we're talking about, or those of you that are watching on the camera at the moment, the 7 billion people globally? Well, the first thing is who wants to change, and everyone's going to put their hand up because everyone's miserable at the moment. But when it comes to, well, who is going to change, everyone puts their hand back down again. Because no one wants to do it. Everyone wants to just sit back and wait. That has to change. How did we go about doing that? Well, one person can't do it on their own. What can a single GP do? Not a lot. Managers provide the context for patients and clinicians to excel, and this is our top team inside the practice. This is Wendy Smallwood, who's our, or Wendy Kirby now, who's our practice manager. Ingrid Brindle, who's the chair of the PPG, and of course myself as a clinician. That's the model of care that we applied inside the practice. Now the reason I bring you this is because now we're going to blow this up and we need your help to do this. Why? Because inside your own practices, get your clinicians together, get your management team together, and get your patient participation group together, and the three of you start to think about, if we're going to start to enable patients in our practice population to have access, what are the issues? What issues do the clinicians have? What are the worries that the managers have? What are the concerns that you might have as patient groups? And we start to share the information. It's that local ownership that's key. Let's start that conversation. Let's engage with the clinicians and managers and the patient groups. Let's bring people in with lived experiences to try and understand what's happening. Because the buzzword now is collaboration. That's what we need to do. We need to collaborate. We need to co-produce. We need to co-develop together as one. And I'm sure everyone in this room would agree that that's the right way forwards, rather than you telling us how to do it or us telling you how to do it. But how are we going to motivate people to do that? 3 aspects of this. Mastery. The ability to get better at something is going to be important. We've all got to get better at it. Autonomy. That feeling of, I can do this, I'm not waiting for someone else to do it, and having a purpose. And if you can get that joint feeling between yourselves, my God, we suddenly change things very, very rapidly. So is this going to be evolution? Are you going to have to go through 10 years like we have to get to where we are? Or is it going to need a revolution where we just clear everyone out and start again? Both of those are very scary. Evolution just takes way too long. Revolution is too scary, so let's go for empowerlution. Let's find that purpose between us. You love it, the world needs it, you pay for it, you're great at it. Let's find that common place where we can all come together. How is that change going to happen? Well, if you take the example of the television, it took 70 years before we really took it over. And that's what people think, it's going to take 50 years, it's going to take a lifetime. Actually, what we're finding is technology is now moving things very quickly. So if you look at texting, it took 3 or 4 years. But if you look at WhatsApp, it's come from nowhere within 1.5 years. Actually, this video, as soon as it's up, it's going to be out there. We're going to share it with everybody. Let's get the message out there. And let's turn it around and help people to understand the old world, which was a telephone, is now called Skype. The picture outside the window, it's now called YouTube, etc., etc. Why? Because actually using that social media, we can start to connect, engage, inform, reflect, share, challenge, be supported, lead, and inspire people and learn. That's how we're going to start to take things forwards.
I've given you all leaflets about Health Pledge. I'd implore you to go online and look at it. What we're saying is a small change in the way you live your life can have a dramatic impact on your health. So please, please support us. It's developed by patients, for patients. It's for everyone.
Here is an article in HSJ on the 15th of May entitled A Promise to Self-Care, which describes how we've enabled patients to access their medical records, but also includes Health Pledge and the team behind it, and how patients from the patient participation group have come together to try and encourage patients to do a health pledge. So what do I now think needs to happen? Well, firstly, we need to inspire everybody and really start to make people feel as though they can believe they can do this, and also feel that patients can access their medical records, and actually start to deliver that as well, not just feel it, but deliver it too. That does require us all to start doing more self-care and understand what it means and our role in being able to self-care more. To do that, it's important to encourage this partnership of trust that brings the experts in the room, the clinician, the patient, as well as the computer systems, that we can share the information between each other, and in doing so build up this relationship, this partnership of trust that we've talked about. We need to think about not just the evidence for what we do, but also the practice that enables us to be able to look at how practices have been doing this, so that we can hopefully copy and emulate it and share it more widely. I think the consent issue is a very, very important issue, and it's extremely important that we understand how we can get this explicit consent from patients, rather than pretending that it's impossible to do, or that there's no point in asking patients. I think it's very important that we reach out to as many people as possible and try and get that explicit consent from patients. In order to do this, I think we need to support patient participation groups and practices to work together to get started. And in order to achieve that, it's important that we start to move towards improving the health literacy of not just individuals, but families and communities. To do that, there's increasing evidence now that we need to think about how we can activate patient, this idea of a patient activation measure that looks at the more activated patients are, the more likely they are to self-care, and the more likely they are to get better outcomes as a result. Actually, I think we need to go beyond just patient activation measures, but also think about clinician activation measures, because in a similar kind of way, you could be a very activated patient, but if the clinician's not particularly activated, it's going to be very hard to move forwards. And I think beyond just clinician activation, perhaps even managerial activation as well. Ultimately, we're thinking about the assets that exist in the community, the people, the organisations that encourage and support the community, and start thinking about how we can move the services out and support those assets, so that other people can reach out to them as well and be able to find out more about what's available. Not just about records access, but in general about looking after yourself, about health services, and about other things that can improve outcomes for everyone. This isn't going to be free, that's very clear. It's important to start thinking about the funding streams and look at how we can redirect funds from perhaps areas that are not working as well into something like this, so that it can support patients and practices to encourage more patients to be able to access their records and so on. And we want to go beyond just accessing records, because there's a whole variety of other online services that are likely to come on board. In our own practice, we're due to introduce something called Ask My GP, which enables patients to complete an instant medical history, or a questionnaire that provides a medical history that we could look at before we actually contact the patient. Finally, we need to think about supporting clinicians, managers and patient participation groups together, and to move away from a target-based culture, which essentially is causing perverse incentives and then perverse outcomes as a consequence, and move towards what I call a values-driven leadership. The NHS values, which come straight from the constitution of the NHS, and we all now need to come together and start to think about what those values are and how we can maintain them. So, what do I think are the 6 P's for success for us to achieve? Well, firstly, clearly it's important that we reach out to patients and the public. And this idea of a partnership of trust, this relationship between patients and clinicians working together. There is a paradigm shift in healthcare taking place. The internet has really changed things in very many other parts of life. And now I think the same thing is going to happen in healthcare. as we start to think about how the internet could change the way we engage with our healthcare services. And finally, it's no good talking about the theory. It's incredibly important that we practice what we preach. We try and learn from this experience, because it's through that learning experience that we'll get better. And finally, we started with the PPG 10 years ago, and I thought we'd finish by looking at where we are now. So if we come back to the practice website, in the middle you can see there it says Thornley House PPG, and if we click on that, then you can see the notice board for the PPG, including the date of the next meeting and the constitution of the PPG and the latest minutes for the PPG as well. And if we slide further down, then you can also see a video there on the role of patient participation groups, which was done in conjunction with the Royal College of GPs Northern Ireland branch, looking at how PPGs can support practices, and it includes a video of Marilyn and myself talking about what we've done. And below that there's a little booklet you can also download as well. You can also see a radio interview that Jackie Glandwood gave, who's another member of our PPG, who talked about Health Pledge on the radio and the PPG and the very important role that we have in supporting patients and the public. And here is a recent photograph of our latest PPG, showing really how it's continued to grow. Yes, there's a manager there, and there's myself as a clinician, but look at how many patients there are as well. That's growing as more and more people get involved. So in summary, just as you can't see plants grow unless you speed up a film, but you know that they do, each day tiny changes take place. It's the same with your life. PPGs have an essential role to play, and I hope we've shown what PPGs could do with practices through this idea of a partnership of trust between patient and clinician. We need to think about not evolution or revolution, but rather empowerlution, and let's collaborate, and let's try and support PPGs to engage with their practices, start small and build. We had no idea where we were going to be when we first started, but we've had an amazing journey over the last 10 years, and we're really looking forward to the future as we build further the next generation healthcare. So finally, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Thank you very much.